Defied out of spite. Sorry, sir, you can't go in here, even if this is your building. A few years ago, I worked as an armed guard at a hospital. The healthcare system it belonged to included 3 large hospitals with 24-hour emergency rooms, several smaller regional hospitals, and dozens of clinics scattered across 3 states. I was assigned to one of the major hospitals, and it happened to be in a pretty rough neighborhood. There were real security threats there every single day. And then one day I was ordered to stand at the main entrance and not let any staff inside. I was like, what the fuck? It turned out that some middle manager had introduced a new rule. All employees had to enter and exit exclusively through the west entrance. The main entrance was now reserved only for patients and visitors so that, God forbid, anyone coming in wouldn't see the hospital staff. My job was to send everyone to the west entrance: doctors, nurses, cafeteria workers, maintenance staff, janitors, and so on. Anyone who refused to comply, I was supposed to write down their names. Later on, they were supposed to get a formal reprimand, but I already had more than enough crap to deal with. Patients with psychosis fighting in the emergency room, people running out onto the helipad just to take selfies with an air ambulance patient, guys on PCP yelling at empty wheelchairs, and an elderly woman with dementia who left her room and got completely lost. I mean, these were actual serious safety issues. Standing guard at the main entrance was a pointless waste of time and went on for several days, until one day this incident happened. Some man in a suit approached the entrance. He was leading a whole group of obviously important people, all dressed in business attire. The guy was walking in front, he had an employee badge, and he was animatedly telling the others something. The group confidently headed straight for the main entrance, where I stopped them. Me. Excuse me, you need to use the west entrance. Him. What? Me. According to hospital rules, employees must use the west entrance. Him. We're going through this one. And he points at the door. Me. No problem, but then I'll need to write down your names. This information will be sent to your management. Looking at me as if I were the dumbest person in the world, he silently brought his badge up to my face and held it there for a very long time. I wrote down his name with extreme slowness and then the names of everyone in his group. To their credit, despite the situation, they all behaved extremely politely, even though I honestly couldn't have cared less. Soon my shift supervisor came over. Supervisor, how are things? Me? Fine. I've written down about 12 people. I show him the list. Supervisor looking at the sheet. Who are these? He points his finger at the first name. Me. I don't know. The badge said something like executive something or other. He looked important. Supervisor, chief executive officer? Me. Yeah, looks like that's him. The supervisor silently turned around and quickly left. As it turned out, that was the CEO of the entire healthcare system who happened to be leading a group of potential investors on a tour. No one had informed him about the new rule regarding the main entrance, and to put it mildly, he was extremely embarrassed that some security guard just following instructions wouldn't let him into his own hospital. After that, as if by magic, the staff was once again allowed to use the main entrance, and I finally got back to doing real security work. Eliminate the department that supports the old system? No problem. One of my former employers decided to stage a spectacular self-destruction, not quietly, but with full fanfare. I'm sharing this story so we can all have a laugh together. In short, at one time our company developed its own internal software that covered almost the entire business. Invoicing, inventory management, reporting, semi-automated direct debit processing, and hundreds of other small subsystems. As a result, 3 separate IT teams emerged within the company. One team handled hardware and basic issues. The second, let's call it the middle team, fixed local failures in individual modules. And the third, the so-called legacy team, worked with the most fundamental level of the system and had been maintaining this software in working condition for over 20 years. In an attempt to cut costs, top management decided that the legacy team was no longer needed. After all, new software is being developed in parallel anyway, and the old one is planned to be phased out in about a year. As part of this decision, the team was also ordered to completely vacate their large office, which meant getting rid of everything inside. Several huge cabinets of documentation, dozens of key manuals, hundreds of up-to-date troubleshooting instructions, and old, already replaced documents that they sometimes had to refer back to. The team wrote a letter to management along the lines of, "Are you absolutely sure?" But after some time, they received a brief and extremely clear response: destroy all paper documentation. Additionally, they were instructed to delete all digital files to free up space on the shared drive and to completely wipe the work computers and restore them to factory settings. And that's exactly what they did. The papers went through the shredder, the files were completely erased, and the computers were wiped clean. The team followed the order to the letter, erased all traces of their work, and went their separate ways to look for more reasonable workplaces. 3 months passed. Recently, they had a sudden power outage, and when the system was restarted, something went wrong. As a result, the company can no longer add products to the warehouse, and since there are no products in stock, the system won't allow invoices to be issued. You can't sell what you don't have. No invoices means no automatic payment processing. Everything has reverted back to the Stone Age. Paper, pens, shared Excel spreadsheets for inventory tracking, manual invoice entry, and manually matching each payment with paper documents. To somehow cope with the workload, people have to work excessive overtime. The company tried to get in touch with the former legacy team, but received a reasonable response. Without the manuals and documentation, which they themselves were ordered to destroy, they simply don't know how to fix any of it. And the launch of the new software is still being postponed for at least another year. But now, two top managers have a spacious office for the two of them, where they can sit and admire the results of their management decisions. Nowhere does it say that marketing doesn't interact with clients directly. About 10 years ago, I worked at a small company that provided web hosting services. At first, I was hired for the most entry-level position in tech support. I answered calls from clients who accidentally broke their websites or forgot their passwords. Over time, I was promoted to team lead and started handling SSL certificates and cloud accounts for our most valuable clients. Eventually, when it turned out that I had a degree in English philology, I was transferred to the marketing department. That was my first job in copywriting and a major leap forward for me. I'm still working in this field. I remember how happy I was when I accepted the position, thinking finally I'll never have to answer those angry client phone calls again. About a year went by. I wrote articles, newsletters, video scripts, and what was especially great, I didn't have to answer any calls. I was sitting at my desk in the marketing department when suddenly the new support team lead came up to me. The very one who took my place after I got promoted. Let's call her Ruth. By the way, I was against her appointment from the start. She was extremely stubborn and rude. Even when she was just a regular support specialist, she was always meddling in things outside her responsibilities, telling colleagues when to go to lunch, trying to manage the call queue, even though her actual job was just to take those calls. But no one took my objections into account, and in the end, the position went to her. Ruth came up to my desk and placed a list of items in front of me. It was some kind of vague action plan that she had thrown together. The gist was that the company's cloud division was growing rapidly, and the security director had tasked her with figuring out how to handle the influx of valuable clients. Ruth's idea was simple. I was once again supposed to take on some of the team lead duties for support and handle the escalation of dissatisfied cloud clients. I immediately gave a firm no. She just blatantly ignored me and continued outlining her plan. I literally kept repeating, "No, Ruth, I'm not going to do this." And in response, I heard, "Yes, yes, so here you can see that if necessary, the call will be routed to you." I was shaking with anger, but I calmly explained that I now work in marketing and I'm done with tech support. She replied, "I checked the corporate directory under roles and responsibilities, and nowhere does it say that marketing doesn't work directly with clients." After that, she smirked with her annoying, self-satisfied smile and said, "Well then, we'll set up a phone on your desk." And she left. I was absolutely beside myself with anger. Basically, from having no calls at all, I was now supposed to start talking on the phone only with the company's most dissatisfied clients. And so, when I was complaining about all this to one of the graphic designers, I suddenly had an epiphany. I remembered what she had said about the corporate directory. I was the only copywriter, and I was the one responsible for its content and updates. The designer noticed the look on my face and said, "Please tell me you're going to do exactly what I think you are." I went into Evernote or whatever system we were using at the time to edit the directory and added a separate item to the marketing team's responsibility section where I clearly stated that we do not take calls, do not respond to emails, and do not have any direct contact with clients. At the same time, this also protected the graphic designers and videographers from any future whims of Ruth. Then I took the paperwork to the security director. He smirked and approved the changes. After that, I put the signed document on Ruth's desk. Actually, the corporate directory clearly states that marketing does not take calls. You can check right here. Looks like you'll have to find another solution. She looked at me as if she wanted to burn me with her gaze, but I just shrugged and walked away. That was the very last contact we ever had. Afterwards, she poached several highly skilled employees from junior tech support, formed a separate cloud team out of them, which never really got off the ground, and a couple of months later, they all quit without giving any sort of prior warning. And in the end, I got a certain satisfaction in the spirit of, "I told you so," finally convinced that this position was too much for her. Since I became a copywriter, I haven't taken a single client call, and I plan to keep it that way. I stopped the company's operations to get my point across. I worked in the engineering department of a small manufacturing company with about 70 or 80 employees. Among other things, I was responsible for all design changes, editing part and assembly drawings, specifications, and other documentation. Previously, stacks of paper documents were collected for this purpose, which would circulate between the engineering department and production, sometimes going back and forth several times, especially if the changes were complex and required the involvement of different people. Over time, the company began transitioning to a software system that was supposed to replace these piles of paper, which often got lost on someone's desk. The problem was that the staff was minimal and no one had the time to properly figure out the system and bring the process to a truly functional state. As a result, everything was set up in the most crude way possible. As soon as any component was included in an engineering change request, it was completely blocked. It could neither be manufactured nor even sold to customers, nor could any machines that use this component. Until the change was completed, which sometimes took weeks, everything simply came to a halt. I repeatedly tried to explain that if the changes affected a part used in several products at once, it would paralyze the entire company. My manager understood this, but was never able to gather everyone involved to properly refine the procedure. At one point, I was tasked with changing the design of a fastener that was used in absolutely every machine we produced. I immediately warned my manager, as soon as I start the process, the sales department will lose the ability to process any orders until the changes are finalized. He just shrugged and said, "Go ahead," fully aware of the consequences. Just half an hour after I started, a sales manager came up to me asking why the system wouldn't allow him to place an order. I explained the situation, he left, and soon after, the company's vice president was standing by my desk with the same question: what needs to be done? I replied that he would have to gather all the stakeholders and finally agree on how the system should function properly instead of just blocking everything just in case. He did it right away. As far as I remember, the discussion took several days and the necessary component was ultimately approved on an expedited basis within a week. I still tell this story in interviews when I'm asked to give an example of a situation where I had to solve a serious work problem. There are rules in this house. Thanks for reminding me, bro. I live in an apartment building and I have two neighbors, Marta and let's call him Shaggy. You'll understand why later. Marta is a kind elderly woman and Shaggy, to put it mildly, is a complete jerk. Even on the day I moved in, he started complaining about the noise, even though I tried to be as quiet as possible, but you can't avoid making some noise. The guy doesn't like it even if I just sneeze, and if I ever forget to clean the entrance when it's my turn, it's a total disaster. His signature phrase is, "There are rules in this building." Any action I take, even the most insignificant one that a normal person would either ignore or discuss with me directly, he immediately reports to the landlord or calls the police right away. I'm always having some kind of problem with this bastard and I can't stand him at all. One evening at 9:50, the police were called on me for making noise even though the house rules only require quiet hours to start at 10. I immediately knew who had ratted me out. It was Shaggy. First of all, Martha doesn't care as long as I'm not making so much noise that the whole house shakes. And second, without her hearing aids, she can barely hear anything and she takes them off every day exactly at 8 in the evening. While the police were walking around my apartment, they said they'd been called because of shouting and swearing and they wanted to check if something serious had happened. In reality, I had just badly burned myself on the stove and cursed from the pain, and overall they were just getting in the way when suddenly one of them asked, "Do you smoke weed?" and pointed to the playground behind the building. And then it hit me. Here in Germany, cannabis is legalized, but the law clearly specifies places where smoking is prohibited, near playgrounds, schools, kindergartens, and so on. Makes perfect sense, right? But Shaggy, that damn stoner, walks around with red eyes, his apartment and clothes reek of weed, and I've never seen him sober. He's always completely wasted, which makes arguing with him both scary and funny at the same time. So, the playground behind our building means that our entire residential complex is a zone where you can't smoke weed, even if you're doing it in your own apartment. Normally, I wouldn't say anything, I'm not a snitch, and besides, Shaggy only smoked in his own place. But as I already mentioned, Shaggy is a complete idiot and a fanatic when it comes to following the rules. Well, two can play at that game. In the end, I finally managed to get rid of the police after they searched every single corner of the place and didn't find any corpse. And then, I suggested that they should check out Shaggy, telling them that he smokes weed near the local playground. Guess whose entire apartment got turned upside down and who ended up getting arrested when he tried to attack a police officer for daring to touch his secret stash? There are rules in this house, Shaggy. Do you want me to just hand out tickets with no exceptions? Okay. Hello everyone. Things were quiet at our pharmacy for a while, but then 2 weeks later the chain of events came full circle and I just needed to find the time to explain it all. Back in October, we noticed that the cash drawer at the self-service checkout started to noticeably slow down. In the past, this always meant one thing. It was time to clean and lubricate it. Besides, we use it non-stop. Usually, to get anything moving with this kind of problem, you have to submit an online ticket just so the issue is recorded and ideally gets addressed. I say ideally for a reason because the system itself is honestly terrible. You can submit tickets there for any reason. Buggy software, slow internet, something physically broken, and so on. But for most of these requests to truly be resolved or addressed, you either need an incredible amount of sheer luck or a dedicated person on the other end who actually cares. To keep things from reaching a critical point, we usually got management involved. They would monitor the tickets in parallel and push the process along so the problem would be resolved faster and wouldn't escalate into an emergency with extra costs. Previously, the deputy manager was a great help with this. With him, you could always calmly discuss everything and find a solution. We had excellent mutual understanding, but at the beginning of November, he left. The new store manager, who had worked for about a year, essentially drove out half of the old team with harsh micromanagement and constant refusals to grant promotions. On top of that, she was obsessed with cutting costs. Once, we tried to get just 2 keyboards replaced, and even that turned into a whole saga. After he left, only she remained. I tried to discuss the situation in advance and warn about possible problems, but all I got in response was, just submit the tickets and forward them if nothing happens. To avoid any misunderstandings later, I recorded the ticket numbers, sent an email, and copied the head pharmacist. At the same time, I clarified directly, so from now on, you don't want me to inform you verbally or by email about ticket issues, delays, or pharmacy matters, only through the system? She replied, yes. That settled it. Let's get back to the car maintenance. The specialist came, looked at the box, and said that most likely it would need to be replaced. I created a ticket, entered all the necessary information, and submitted the request. No comments or reminders. I just let the system work the way they required me to. Every 48 hours, I escalated the request as permitted if there was no progress on it. About 10 days passed like this without any results. On the 12th day in the morning, while I was opening the pharmacy and serving customers, at some point the drawer just stopped moving. I had to ask the customer to come inside to finish the service and close the drive-through line. By that point, the equipment was essentially broken and we urgently needed at least some kind of response. So we filed an emergency ticket to officially document the malfunction and finally get things moving. When a request is filed as an emergency, a specialist is almost guaranteed to be sent within 2 to 4 hours, but at the same time, the full set of extra charges kicks in, enough to give any cost-conscious manager a heart attack. Urgency surcharges, higher labor rates, unscheduled maintenance, and other such delightful bonuses. Moreover, in such cases, spare parts are ordered automatically, without any approval from the manager, because the situation is considered critical. So it's no surprise that upon learning about the emergency request, the manager literally rushed to the pharmacy, demanding to know why no one had informed her. I calmly reminded her that she herself had asked in an email not to bother her with such matters and to simply submit tickets. Almost 2 weeks had passed since the first request, and by now we could no longer work properly, so there was simply no other option left except for the emergency one. As far as I know, in such cases, a notification is also sent to the regional manager, but I can't say for sure. In any case, I didn't hear anything from him. For the store, this resulted in extremely unpleasant consequences. The system that had to be replaced was installed back in the early 2000s when the store first opened. As a result, we had to have a new self-service checkout custom made because that model has long been out of production. On top of that, several specialist visits were required to prepare for the installation itself. And the cherry on top was the customer complaints due to the prolonged closure of the drive-through service window. Then when the drive-through service metrics drop, bonuses automatically get cut as well. I saw the bill for part of the work. The technician himself was quite reasonable, but as far as I understood, just making the checkout cost about $25,000 because it was urgent. And that's not even counting service fees and other expenses. As a result, a problem that could have been calmly addressed from the very first ticket without any rush and for much less money turned into a repair that cost 3 to 4 times more solely because of urgent rates and extra charges due to the delays. Following those events, the manager suddenly started to occasionally inquire in passing if there were any specific tickets in the system that deserved more attention. Technically, she is not my direct boss, but I have kept all of that email correspondence securely archived just in case she ever tries to shift the blame or responsibility onto me and I find that I need to show it to her regional manager. In any case, the moral here is this: address problems right away and listen to your employees. It always ends up costing less. Was the manager removed from her position? Alright, no problem. This story happened many years ago, but after reading another story about malicious compliance, I decided to share mine as well. I was in charge of a team of programmers. At the very beginning, I had only 5 people reporting to me, so I could easily split my time about evenly, half spent coding, half on management. As a result of annual evaluations, I consistently received ratings like exceeds expectations or significantly exceeds expectations. About 10 years later, the team had grown to 25 people, and I was writing code less and less often. A few more years passed, and 1 year I was absent for almost 2 months due to surgery and a subsequent hospital stay. Nevertheless, at the annual review, my manager, a person who had absolutely no understanding of programming, stated that I was not doing my job well and that the department was regularly missing deadlines, which apparently had nothing to do with the fact that I had been in the hospital. As a result, I was told that I was no longer a manager and had to return to the role of a regular programmer, focusing exclusively on development. I was really burned out, but I said I would somehow get through it. I explained to my former subordinates what had happened and asked them to direct absolutely all questions directly to my manager, the very same one who didn't understand anything about programming. He was quickly overwhelmed with questions, and soon upper management realized that the problem wasn't with me, but with him. He was fired and replaced by the vice president of programming from the UK. I was working in the US. She turned out to be an excellent manager, had started her career as a programmer, and overall was a very reasonable boss. Since I was now officially just a regular developer and all the managers were located in the UK, I asked my former employees to direct all their questions to their new supervisors in Britain. Because of the 6-hour time difference between us, we only had 2 or 3 overlapping work hours each day, which made it much harder to resolve any urgent issues quickly. At the same time, my health worsened, and my doctor strongly recommended that I switch to a 4-day work week, 32 hours, so as not to make my condition worse. The company, however, maintained a strict 40-hour workweek policy, so I started looking for a new job and received 8 offers in about a month. I was already mentally prepared to quit. A few months later, the new manager eventually offered me a managerial position again due to the time difference between the US and the UK, and because I had the most programming experience in the company. In response, I submitted my resignation and explained my reasons. She asked under what conditions I would be willing to stay. I replied that I wanted a 10% salary increase and to switch to a 4-day workweek, 32 hours. I gave her a date to respond. She discussed it with management and came back the next day with an agreement. Alright, I won't work out in a tank top anymore. First, a little background. Many years ago, I was a driver in the Dutch Navy. I'm 45 now, but back then I was 21. At one point in my career, I was stationed at a small naval base that specialized in physical rehabilitation for personnel. The base was incredibly small, just a few hundred people. I drove patients to the military hospital, transported groups of people to the swimming pool, and did similar tasks. On weekends when I was home, I trained at my regular civilian gym. On weekdays after duty, I worked out in the small gym right on the base. I lived there all week. At that time, I was preparing for my first bodybuilding competition, was pretty muscular and trained a lot and regularly. One day, the gym supervisor, a Marine sergeant, told me that someone from higher up didn't like the way I looked and that I was no longer allowed to train in a tank top. My tank top was loose and purely functional, and as far as I understood, it didn't bother anyone. I was outraged and pointed to another guy in the gym who was also training in a tank top, asking why he wasn't being told anything. He was in good shape, but noticeably less muscular than I was. The sergeant, with whom I had an excellent relationship, agreed with me, but explained that the order specifically concerned me and that an order is an order. He himself thought this decision was stupid, but said that everything had already been decided from above and he had no choice. In the end, I just waved it off and finished my workout. The next day, a brilliant idea came to me. I took one of the t-shirts from our PSU, our personal standard equipment. It was a white, elastic, tight-fitting t-shirt, and I decided to wear it to the workout. When he saw me, the sergeant just shook his head and said that the officers definitely wouldn't appreciate something like that. I replied that this was official uniform issued by the Navy, so there couldn't possibly be anything wrong with it. At the same time, in this t-shirt, my body was even more visible than in the tank top. It highlighted every muscle, especially when I was sweating. Technically, I complied with all the rules and no one could fault me. The sergeant laughed because he understood perfectly well that I was right, but he warned me that the higher-ups would most likely be displeased. For the entire following week, I kept training in that shirt, and after the weekend, the sergeant told me with a smile that the higher command had rescinded their order and asked me to train in the tank top again. Thank you very much for watching. Share your own stories of malicious compliance in the comments below, and don't forget to check out our other videos. Hugs! See you tomorrow. Bye.